Hey everyone, I'm BB, and I'm so glad you're here with me at my studio that I wrote this story because I wanted to explore a connection that defies the rules of biology and what society expects of us. I wanted to capture what it's like living with a broken system and finally finding that one person who makes all the noise go quiet. This story is about the friction between the ice and the fire, and the moment a person stops being a victim and starts using their pain as a weapon to reclaim their life. If you enjoy the atmosphere of this world, please check out my shop. That's the only place where my older stories are available for anyone who wants to dive deeper into my collection. Okay, now let's go.
Chapter 1: The Headache and the Rain. I remember the rain in this city didn't wash the streets clean. It just made the filth glossy. I was a shadow lurching from the tree-line, stumbling into the center of the road, soaking wet, with my arms flailing. I collapsed right as a heavy luxury car skidded and halted inches from my knees. I was nothing but a heap of dark clothing and pale skin on the wet road. I was dressed in a ruined tuxedo, torn at the collar and stained with mud, my dark hair matted to my forehead. As a dominant alpha in neuroshock from a forced transition, I was shivering violently, my face flushed with an unnatural fever. When a man crouched down near me, I whispered for help without opening my eyes. I shot my hand out, gripping his ankle, my skin burning hot, and told him not to let them take the painting. He asked who I was, but I just groaned about the heat and dragged myself closer until my nose bumped his knee. I inhaled sharply, taking in his scent of frost and white sandalwood. I let out a low, needy whine and told him he smelled like ice. He hooked his arms under me, surprisingly strong, and hoisted my heavy frame up. I immediately curled into him, burying my face in his neck to seek out his cold skin. He ordered his driver to open the door, and slid into the back seat with me draped across his lap as we sealed ourselves inside the dark, leather-scented interior. Chapter 2: The Cold Trap. When I woke up with a gasp, my body felt heavy and filled with lead. The last thing I remembered was my engagement party, the champagne tasting wrong, and my fiancé Mark laughing as security dragged me out the back door into the rain. I realized I wasn't on the asphalt anymore. I was in a massive bed covered in silk-like sheets. I was wearing a clean, dark gray bathrobe that wasn't mine, and my clothes were gone. Cold, sharp panic pierced my haze. As a dominant alpha, my instinct was to assess and neutralize threats, so I scanned the room. In a velvet armchair sat a man in a black turtleneck reading a tablet. He looked like a marble statue, cold and utterly dangerous. He told me I was awake without looking up. I let out an involuntary rumble from my chest, demanding to know where I was and who he was. He looked up with startling gray eyes devoid of warmth, introduced himself as Elliot Tristan, and pointed to my wallet on the table, noting I was Jeff Cross. I froze. Everyone knew the Ice King of the corporate world, the recessive alpha who destroyed competitors for sport. I demanded to know why I was there, swinging my legs off the bed, but my knees buckled from the drugs Mark slipped me, mixing with the onset of a stress-induced rut. Elliot calmly said I collapsed in front of his car and walked toward me. I flinched, my pheromones flaring in a wave of aggression to make him back down, and warned him I couldn't control my scent and might hurt him if he came closer. He didn't stop, walking until his knees bumped the mattress, towering over me. He told me softly that my scent was the only reason I was still breathing. He explained his condition. Pheromones caused him pain except mine, which neutralized it. He leaned down, placing a hand on either side of my hips, trapping me. I should have felt threatened and punched him in the jaw, but as he got close, I smelled that mesmerizing frost again. My blood was boiling from the drug and betrayal, but his frozen forest scent was soothing and necessary. I whispered with dilated eyes that he was the ice, and he replied that I was the fire, looking at me with an intense expression of possession. He asked who put me in the gutter, noting a dominant alpha doesn't end up there without a story. The humiliating memory crashed over me, and I clenched my white knuckles, explaining how Mark and my stepbrother drugged me to steal my paintings to present as Leo's work at a gallery opening next week. I laughed bitterly, telling him I had no money or phone, and he was out of luck if he expected a reward. He studied me for a long moment, then picked up a black rectangle and tossed it onto the bed between my legs. A black centurion card. He dismissed the need for my money, stating he had more money than God, and instead wanted to employ me. My job was to sleep in his room and let him be near me when he had a migraine. In exchange, he told me to use the card to buy whatever I needed and destroy the people who did this to me. I thought of Mark's smug face and my stepbrother stealing my life's work, and picked up the cold, heavy card. I warned him he was playing a dangerous game keeping a strange alpha in his bedroom, but he just said he liked danger and ordered me to lie down because his head was hurting again. Chapter 3: The Scenting. The first night was the hardest, with the storm still rattling the panoramic windows outside. I lay stiffly on the left side of the massive bed in the provided silk pajamas, while Elliot lay fully dressed on top of the covers on the right side. 2 alphas in one territory usually meant bloodshed, but the air in the room vibrated with a strange magnetic pull. I felt his gaze on my back until he softly commanded me to turn over. I hesitated, then rolled to face him. The room was dim, and he looked exhausted, the lines of pain returning to his forehead. He whispered the noise was coming back, pressing the heel of his hand to his eye. I asked what he wanted me to do, my voice husky. The drug had worn off, but his proximity triggered an insane biological need to protect and wrap him up. He told me to come closer. I scooted until there was only an inch between us, our chests brushing. He ordered me to expose my gland, his voice trembling slightly. I swallowed hard, knowing exposing the scent gland on the neck to another alpha was an act of ultimate submission or immense trust. We had known each other for 4 hours, but the look in his eyes wasn't dominance. It was desperation. Slowly, I tilted my head, bearing my pulse point and the gland beneath my jaw. He surged forward without hesitating, but he didn't bite or lick. He buried his face in the curve of my neck, his cold, hard nose pressing against my burning skin as he took a long, shuddering breath. He rested his forehead against my shoulder, his breathing finally evening out into a slow, rhythmic pattern as tension leaked from his body, making him heavy and soft in my arms. Eventually, my hands settled on his back, and I began to stroke his spine, slow and rhythmic. I whispered into the darkness for him to go to sleep and promised I wasn't going anywhere. He didn't answer. He was already dead to the world, safe in my embrace. Chapter 4: The Transformation. The next morning, the dynamic shifted. When I woke, Elliot was already gone, his side of the bed cold, but the scent of frost lingered on my skin. A butler entered with a trolley, informing me Elliot had left for the office and given instructions for me to go shopping and not be cheap. He handed me an envelope. Inside was the black card and a sharp note telling me to make them regret looking down on me, expecting me to be dressed for war when he returned. Alone in the silent suite, I let my silk robe slide off and looked at myself in the full-length mirror for the first time in days. My body was a map of my recent history. Ugly bruises blooming across my ribs where security dragged me out, scrape marks on my knees, pale skin drawn tight, and haunted red-rimmed eyes. A sudden, violent wave of dizziness hit me. I stumbled, grabbing the edge of the dresser to keep from falling as my knees trembled and buckled. The chemical hangover from Mark's drugs mixed with the sheer exhaustion of betrayal. I was running on fumes in spite, looking at my shaking hands. A voice whispered I could hide here, just be the invalid in the tower. I looked back at the mirror and saw the victim Mark threw away. Then my eyes drifted to the black card on the bed. I thought of Leo's laugh, the cloudy ring, and the years I spent making myself smaller so Mark could feel big. I took a deep, shuddering breath, forced my spine to straighten and my chin up. Not today, I whispered to my reflection. I told myself I could collapse and cry later, but today I fight. I picked up the cool metal card. It didn't feel like money, it felt like a weapon. 3 hours later, showered, shaved, and my hair styled back, I walked into the city's most exclusive boutique. I radiated a dangerous dominant alpha aura. The skeptical assistant in the VIP section told me it was by appointment only and sneered that their suits started at $50,000, suggesting the outlet store downstairs. Then a voice cut through the air. Mark, coming out of the fitting room with my stepbrother Leo hanging on his arm. Leo laughed, saying he thought I was living under a bridge, and asked if I came to beg for my old clothes back. Mark looked guilty but arrogant, telling me not to cause a scene because they were buying Leo's outfit for the gallery opening. I felt rage boil in my gut, but I remembered the weight of the black card and Elliot's command to make them regret it. I stepped forward smoothly, my pheromones spiking just enough to make Mark flinch, and declared I was there to shop. Leo scoffed that I was penniless. I turned to the sales assistant and asked for the senior manager. I pulled out the Centurion card, and the manager's eyes nearly popped out of his head. I told him I wanted the entire autumn collection in my size, plus the suit Leo was holding. In fact, I told him I'd take every suit in that style so no one else could wear it. Leo shrieked, and I looked at Mark, asking if he could pay for it right now. Mark patted his pockets, stammering about a credit limit. I handed the card to the manager and told him to swipe it and deliver everything to the Tristan estate. The manager hesitated at Elliot's name, wanting to call for authorization. I leaned against the counter and challenged him to call and ask Elliot if the fire is allowed to spend his money. The manager made the call with shaking hands, hung up looking pale, and announced that Mr. Tristan says the limit does not exist. Mark whispered, "Tristan estate?" As his face drained of color, I stepped closer, invading his space with a terrifying growl, and confirmed I found a new patron who appreciates real talent. I glanced at the diamond engagement ring that was supposed to be mine on Leo's finger, noted it looked cloudy, and told him to get his eyes checked. I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving them in stunned silence. Chapter 5: The Return. That evening, I waited in the grand foyer of the mansion wearing one of the new suits, a deep midnight blue velvet that made my skin look luminous. The front doors opened, and Elliot walked in, flanked by two secretaries frantically taking notes. He looked exhausted, but he stopped when he saw me. His gaze traveled from my polished shoes up my long legs to the velvet jacket and finally to my face. He dropped his briefcase with a thud and ordered his secretaries to leave us. He walked up to me without a word, grabbed the lapels of my new jacket, and pulled me down. He buried his face in my neck right there in the hallway, inhaling deeply. "You spent $3 million today," he murmured against my skin. "I did," I replied, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Are you angry?" He lifted his head. His gray eyes were dark, pupils blown wide, with a rare slight flush coloring his pale cheeks. "Angry?" he whispered, his voice dripping with dark satisfaction. "I got the notification during a board meeting. Seeing you spend my money. Seeing you use my power." His hand slid down to grip my waist, his thumb pressing hard against my hip bone. It was the most arousing thing that has happened to me all year. He looked me in the eye. "Do it again. Bankrupt them. Break them." He leaned in, his lips brushing my ear. "And when you are done, come back to my bed." Chapter 6: The Armor. The walk-in closet of the Tristan estate was larger than the apartment I had shared with Mark. It was a cavern of polished wood and glass, filled with rows of bespoke suits that cost more than most cars. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror, adjusting the cuffs of my new midnight blue velvet jacket. It fit me like a second skin, tight across the shoulders and tapering at the waist. It was aggressive, it was loud, and it was perfect. "It's missing something," a voice said from the doorway. I turned to find Elliot leaning against the frame, watching me. He was dressed in a sharp charcoal three-piece suit that made him look like a weapon sheathed in silk. "It's too loose." My hand stilled. "I can fix it," I said. "Put your hands down," he replied, and it wasn't a request. I dropped my hands to my sides. He reached out with long, cool, precise fingers, undoing the knot of my silk tie before beginning to retie it. The motion was slow and deliberate, his knuckles brushing against my throat right over the pulse point. I swallowed hard, my Adam's apple bobbing against his thumb. The proximity was intoxicating. For 2 days we had lived in this strange limbo, sleeping in the same bed to cure his migraines but barely touching during the day. "Tonight is not just a party," he said quietly. his eyes focused on the knot. It is a declaration of war. You are walking into a room full of vultures who think you are a carcass to be picked clean. If you show even a crack in your armor, they will tear you apart. He tightened the knot, sliding it up until it was snug against my collar, almost choking me, but in a way that felt grounding. "I'm not afraid of them," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "Not anymore." "Good," he said, smoothing my lapels. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a brooch. It was a sapphire, dark and deep, surrounded by jagged diamonds that looked like ice shards. "This is the Tristan family crest," he said, pinning it to my lapel. The metal pin pierced the velvet with a soft snick. I looked down at the jewel and told him I couldn't wear it. "This tells everyone that you are mine," Elliot finished, looking up to lock eyes with me. The gray in his irises swirled like a winter storm. "That is the point. When you walk in there, you are not Jeff Cross, the failed artist. You are the man under Elliot Tristan's protection, and no one touches what is mine." The possession in his voice triggered a spike in my pheromones, a burst of burnt whiskey scent that was smoky and rich. Elliot's nostrils flared, and he leaned in, inhaling sharply near my jaw. "You smell like violence today," he whispered, a shiver running through him. "Keep that scent. Don't hide it. Let them smell the fire before they even see you." He stepped back, the mask of the cold CEO sliding back into place. "The car is waiting. Let's go break some hearts." Chapter 7. The Viper's Nest. The Galerie Lumière was the epicenter of the city's high society. Tonight, it was bathed in golden light, filled with the soft clinking of champagne flutes and the murmur of gossip. The event was the debut of my stepbrother Leo, who was being hailed as the prodigy of modern abstract art. Inside, Leo was holding court. He wore a white suit that was a size too big, holding a champagne glass with his pinky extended. Mark stood beside him playing the doting fiancé, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, the inspiration just came to me," Leo was saying to a group of critics. "I spent months in isolation, channeling my inner pain into these strokes." He gestured to the centerpiece of the exhibit, a massive canvas painted in turbulent shades of indigo and black depicting a storm at sea. "Brilliant," a critic sighed. "The raw emotion is palpable." Mark squeezed Leo's shoulder, calling his Leo a genius and saying he was just glad he could support him. "Support him with money you stole." My voice cut through the chatter. The room didn't go silent immediately, but the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The heavy double doors at the entrance swung open, and Elliot walked in. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Elliot was a figure of myth in these circles, the recluse who never attended frivolous art shows. His presence alone made the room stop breathing, but then they saw who was walking beside him, me. I didn't look like the disheveled, broken man dragged out of my engagement party a week ago. I looked like a king. The velvet suit caught the light, and the sapphire brooch on my chest gleamed like a warning beacon. I walked with a predator's grace, my arm linked with Elliot's. I didn't look at the floor. I looked straight at Leo. "Elliot," Mark choked out, stepping forward involuntarily. What is he doing here?" Elliot ignored Mark completely, guiding me toward the center of the room and stopping directly in front of the main painting. "So," Elliot said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the silent gallery, "this is the masterpiece everyone is talking about." I tilted my head, studying the painting. It was my painting. I remembered the night I painted it, the night my mother died. I remembered mixing the ashes of her favorite letters into the black paint to give it texture. "It's hung upside down," I said loudly. Leo sputtered. "Excuse me? You're just jealous, Jeff. Security. Get him out of here." "It's upside down," I repeated, stepping closer. "And if you look at the bottom right corner under the layer of indigo, you'll find a signature. Not yours, Leo. Mine. Written in UV reactive paint. Because I learned a long time ago never to trust anyone with my originals." I pulled a small UV keychain light from my pocket, a tool I used to check varnishes, and shone it on the canvas. A bright glowing blue signature appeared through the dark paint. J. Cross. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Liar? Leo shrieked, his face turning red. You're just a bitter, recessive, loving loser. Mark stepped in front of Leo, trying to salvage the situation. He puffed out his chest, releasing a wave of aggressive alpha pheromones meant to intimidate. Jeff, stop embarrassing yourself. You're making a scene, Mark demanded. You're just mad because I chose Leo over you. Look at you hanging off Elliot Tristan like a charity case. Elliot stepped forward. He didn't release pheromones. He didn't need to. He simply looked at Mark with the dead, flat eyes of a shark. Mr. Tristan, Mark stammered, his aggression faltering instantly. I didn't mean you. I just mean Jeff is unwell. He's obsessed with me. Obsessed, Elliot repeated, raising an eyebrow and looking at me. Are you? I laughed. A dark, rich sound. I'd rather drink poison. Elliot turned back to Mark. You heard him. And as for charity case, Jeff is not a charity case. He is the new owner of this gallery. What? The gallery owner, a short, sweating man in the corner, stepped forward. Mr. Tristan, we haven't signed. My lawyers sent the wire transfer 5 minutes ago, Elliot said dismissively. Double the market value. Get out. Elliot then turned to the crowd. This exhibition is a fraud. The artist is a fraud. And anyone who buys a painting from Leo Cross tonight will be blacklisted from doing business with Tristan Enterprises forever. The effect was instantaneous. People began to step away from Leo and Mark as if they were contagious. Chapter 8. Diamond Dust. The humiliation was palpable. Leo was crying, mascara running down his face. Mark was vibrating with rage and panic, losing his social standing in real time. Desperate to regain some ground, Mark grabbed Leo's hand and thrust it into the air. We don't need your approval, Mark shouted, his voice cracking. We have love. Look at this ring. It's a 5-carat flawless diamond. It's worth more than your entire life, Jeff. The ring glittered under the gallery lights. It was gaudy, huge, and utterly tasteless. I looked at it. It was the design I had picked out years ago, the one Mark had promised me. Seeing it on Leo's finger should have hurt, but instead, I just felt bored. I let go of Elliot's arm and walked over to a high table near the sculpture display. A diamond, you say? I asked, walking toward Mark. Yes, Mark sneered. The hardest substance on earth. Like our love. Hardest substance, I mused. I moved faster than Mark expected, reaching out and snatching the ring right off Leo's finger. Hey, give that back, Leo screamed.
Hey everyone, just taking a quick second to step away from the story. I really hope you're enjoying the journey so far. If you're vibing with the atmosphere of this world and want more, I'd love for you to come by my shop. That is the exclusive home for all my older audiobooks that you can't find anywhere else. I have my entire collection of BL stories and my Transmigration series waiting for you there. Writing these stories and building these worlds means everything to me, and having your support at the shop is what allows me to keep creating. I truly hope you find a new favorite over there and enjoy diving deeper into these collections. The link is right down in the description box. Now, let's get back to the story.
Let's test the quality, I said coolly. I walked back to the sculpture display, holding the platinum band between my thumb and forefinger, positioning the heavy stone over the solid marble pedestal. What are you doing? Mark yelled, lunging forward. Elliot signaled, and 2 massive bodyguards stepped out of the shadows, blocking Mark's path. Testing the hardness, I said. With a sharp, violent motion, I brought the ring down. Crack. I didn't use it to tap. I used it like a hammer. I smashed the gem into the unforgiving marble, the sound a sharp, distinct crunch. I lifted my hand. The platinum band was bent, and the diamond had shattered, leaving a pile of sparkling grit and larger jagged chunks on the pedestal. The room went dead silent. Oops, I said, my voice dripping with mock sympathy. A real diamond would have cleaved along the facet. Mark, it wouldn't have crushed like that. I swiped a finger through the debris on the pedestal, holding up a finger coated in fine dust. This shattered into jagged glassy shards. A real diamond would have cleaved cleanly or chipped. But this is basically glass, and a cheap glass fill at that. I tossed the ruined metal band back at Mark. It hit his chest and fell to the floor with a pathetic tink. I wiped my hand on a silk napkin, tossing it onto the table. Next time you want to impress someone, buy real jewelry. It lasts longer. Laughter rippled through the crowd, starting as a giggle and turning into a roar. Leo stared at the shattered pieces, then looked at Mark with pure hatred. "You said it was real," Leo screamed, slapping Mark across the face. The scene descended into chaos as camera flashes went off like strobe lights. I didn't watch. I turned and walked back to Elliot. Elliot was watching me with an expression of intense dark hunger. His pupils were so dilated the gray was almost gone. "Are we done?" Elliot asked, his voice rough. "I think the point has been made," I replied, my own adrenaline spiking. "Good," Elliot said, grabbing my hand with a bruising grip, "because if we stay here another minute, I'm going to lose my composure." Chapter 9. The Adrenaline Crash. We exited through the back door, flanked by security, leaving the chaos of the gallery behind. The rain had stopped, and the city pavement glistened under the streetlights. "That was incredible," I breathed, the cold night air hitting my flushed face. I felt high. The vengeance, the public vindication, the look on Mark's face, it was a cocktail of dopamine and adrenaline. But underneath it, something darker was stirring. The confrontation with two other alphas had flooded my system with challenge pheromones. My body was wired for a fight or for something else. "Get in," Elliot ordered, shoving me toward the waiting Maybach. I slid into the back seat, and Elliot followed, slamming the door shut. "Drive." Elliot commanded the driver over the intercom and put up the partition. The black glass divider slid up with a mechanical whir, sealing us off from the driver. The world outside disappeared. It was just the two of us in the dark, leather-scented box. The silence lasted for 3 seconds, then the air shifted. My scent of burnt whiskey was pouring off me in waves, fueled by the aggression of the night, filling the car thick and suffocating. Usually, this much alpha pheromone would give Elliot a seizure. But tonight, combined with the victory and the sight of me destroying his enemies, it acted like an accelerant. Elliot let out a low, ragged breath. He loosened his tie, his fingers shaking. "You're dangerous," he whispered. "You enjoyed that, destroying them." "I did," I admitted, turning to look at him. The passing streetlights strobed across Elliot's face, illuminating the sweat beading on his temple. "Does that bother you? That I'm not a good person?" Elliot laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Bother me? I'm a ruthless CEO, Jeff. I destroy lives for profit. Good people bore me." He shifted, sliding across the leather seat until his thigh pressed against mine. "But you," his voice dropped to a growl. "You are overwhelming. My head is spinning. It's not pain. It's intoxication." "You need your medicine," I teased, though my own heart was hammering. The proximity of the recessive alpha was triggering my own instincts. His scent of ice and sandalwood was crisp and sharp, cooling the fire in my blood. "I don't need medicine," Elliot said. "I need you." Chapter 10. The Glass Cage. Outside, the city passed by in a blur of lights. Inside, the world had narrowed down to the friction of fabric, the sound of ragged breathing, and the overwhelming realization that this strange, violent compatibility was the only thing that mattered. I realized in the hazy heat of the moment that I wasn't just working for Elliot anymore, and he wasn't just my boss. Elliot pulled back, gasping for air, his forehead resting against mine. We were both trembling. "You're mine," he whispered, the words sounding like a threat and a prayer. "Don't you dare think about leaving. I won't let you." "I'm not going anywhere," I promised, kissing the sweat off his brow. "I'm addicted, too." The car hit a bump, jostling us, but neither moved. We stayed tangled together in the back of the Maybach, two broken halves of a whole, finally fusing together in the dark. Chapter 11. The Backlash. Wednesday morning did not bring peace. It brought the storm. Elliot sat at the head of the long dining table, his tablet propped up against a crystal water pitcher. He was dressed for the office in a severe navy suit, but he wasn't eating. He was just watching me. I sat across from him, picking at a plate of eggs. The events of the gallery opening, the smashed ring, and the public humiliation of Mark and Leo had happened only 12 hours ago. My adrenaline had crashed, leaving me looking brittle. "You are trending," Elliot said, breaking the silence with a low voice completely devoid of his usual morning roughness. I looked up. "Is it bad?" "It is mixed," Elliot replied, swiping a finger across his screen. "Half the internet calls you a gold digger who leaped from one bed to a bigger one. The other half calls you an icon for exposing a fraud. The video of you smashing the ring has 3 million views." I let out a dry laugh. "Mark must be losing his mind." "Mark is desperate," Elliot corrected, his gray eyes darkening. "And desperate men are dangerous. I have doubled the security detail at the gate." I put my fork down. "I have to go out today, Elliot," I insisted. Elliot frowned, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. "That is unwise," he warned. "Stay here. Let the lawyers handle the fallout." "I can't," I countered. "My intellectual property lawyer agreed to see me at noon. If I don't file the injunction against the gallery today, Leo can legally sell 3 more of my paintings. I won't let him profit off me for 1 more second." Elliot studied me. He could undoubtedly smell the distress coming off me. A sharp, acrid spike in my burnt whiskey scent. It must have triggered a dull throb behind his eyes, but he pushed it down. He understood my need for control. I had lost everything and needed to claw some of it back myself. "Take Harrison," Elliot finally ordered, "and take the armored sedan. I'll have the trailing security team follow you in the SUV." "No trailing team," I said, grabbing my coat. "If a convoy shows up at the law firm, the press will swarm me. I need to get in and out quietly. Just Harrison. The car is bulletproof, isn't it?" Elliot hesitated, his jaw tightening. He didn't like it, but he saw the resolve in my eyes. "Fine," he relented. "But do not roll down the windows for anything." 3 hours later, I stepped out of the law firm in the financial district. The meeting had gone well, the injunction was filed, and for the first time I felt like I had solid ground beneath my feet. "Mr. Cross," Harrison said, opening the back door of the sedan. "We should move. The paparazzi have been spotted 2 blocks over." "Let's go," I agreed, ducking my head. I was halfway into the car when a heavy delivery van screeched to a halt directly behind us, boxing us in against the curb. Harrison spun around, immediately reaching for his holster. "Sir, get inside," Harrison yelled. Before I could close the door, the side of the van slid open. 2 men in balaclavas jumped out, moving with the frantic, sloppy energy of hired thugs rather than professional mercenaries. One of them swung a heavy baton, catching Harrison in the shoulder. My driver grunted, dropping to one knee as his gun skittered across the pavement. "Grab him!" a voice shouted from the van. I recognized that voice instantly, raw and hysterical. It was Mark. I tried to scramble to the other side of the car, but a hand grabbed my ankle. I kicked out, connecting with a jaw, but another pair of hands forcefully grabbed my jacket. "Get off me!" I roared, releasing a wave of dominant alpha pheromones meant to force them into submission. It didn't work. These men were betas, completely immune to the command. They dragged me out of the sedan. I fought viciously, my elbows and knees flying, until a cloth was suddenly pressed over my face. The smell of chloroform was sickly sweet and overpowering. The world went gray, then black, as someone yelled, "We got him!" The last thing I heard was the screech of tires and Harrison shouting into his radio. Chapter 12. The Ice Breaks. I would find out later that at the exact moment I was taken, Elliot was in the middle of a merger negotiation when the pain hit him. It wasn't a gradual onset. It was a sledgehammer. One moment he was reading a contract, and the next, a blinding white spike of agony drove itself through his left temple. So intense he dropped his pen and doubled over gasping. The opposing CEO asked if he was all right. alarmed by the sudden collapse. For Elliot, the pain was a screaming, living thing, and for the first time in his life, he knew exactly what it meant. It wasn't just his biology malfunctioning. It was the absence of his cure. When his phone lit up with Harrison's name, Elliot answered with an uncontrollably shaking hand. He didn't even say hello. He just snarled, "Where is he?" with a terrifying guttural sound that made the billionaires in the room recoil. Harrison, filled with pain and panic, told him I was taken in a van ambush and they were heading east toward the industrial district. Elliot stood up so violently his chair crashed against the wall. He roared at the room of executives to get out, the raw, primal sound clearing the room in seconds. Breathing through the agony, he didn't call the police or a private army. Instead, he focused on my burnt whiskey scent and pulled up a tracking app. He had sewn a GPS tag into the lining of my velvet jacket himself. Paranoia was a hard habit for him to break. The dots stopped at a derelict warehouse on the waterfront. The blinding pain in his head made him stagger, but his cold, solid rage kept him upright as he made his way to the elevator. I woke up tied to a chair in the center of an open floor inside that cavern of rust and dust. Sunlight pierced through holes in the roof, illuminating motes dancing in the stagnant air. I was groggy, feeling a bruise forming on my cheek. Mark was pacing back and forth in front of me, looking utterly unhinged with his tie undone and his hair wild. Leo was sitting on a crate nearby, chewing his fingernails and looking far more scared than smug. "You ruined me," Mark screamed, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "My investors pulled out. The gallery is worthless. You think you can just embarrass me and walk away? You embarrassed yourself, Mark," I rasped, my head lolling. "Let me go. Elliot will kill you." Mark laughed hysterically. "Elliot Tristan is a businessman," he sneered. "Everyone knows about his headaches. He can't even be in a room with a strong alpha without passing out. You think he's coming for you? He's probably glad to be rid of the smell." "Is that so?" The voice didn't come from the door. Came from the shadows. Mark froze. The two hired thugs spun around, holding their crowbars. Elliot Tristan stepped into the light. He looked terrible. His skin was paper white, sweat was beading on his forehead, and his eyes were squeezed half shut against the light. He looked like a man on the verge of a stroke, but he was walking. "Elliot," I breathed. Well, Mark sneered, puffing out his chest. He released a wave of aggressive alpha pheromones, a scent like burning rubber and musk specifically designed to bring a recessive alpha to his knees. "Look who showed up to die." Elliot didn't speak. He took a shallow breath, holding it to minimize the intake of Mark's scent. The pain in his head was a white-hot blinding spike, but pure adrenaline was keeping his body moving for the next 60 seconds before he would collapse. Elliot flinched as the scent hit him, staggering as one hand went to his temple. It looked like his skull was splitting open, but he didn't fall. "You misunderstand my condition, Mark," Elliot said, his voice deadly calm. "Pain doesn't stop me. It just removes my patience." Elliot looked at the two thugs and pointed a shaking finger at the largest one. "You, what is he paying you?" The thug blinked, confused. 10 grand. "I will give you 50,000 each," Elliot said flatly, "to walk out that door right now and never come back." The thugs looked at each other. They looked at the sweaty, hysterical Mark, and then at Elliot, whose suit cost more than their houses. "Deal," the thug said, dropping his crowbar. Mark shrieked that he hired them, but the thug just shrugged, saying business was business. They walked past Elliot, giving him a wide berth, and exited the warehouse. Now it was just the three of us and Leo, who was shrinking into the shadows. Mark panicked as he realized he had lost his muscle, but he still thought he had his biology. As a dominant alpha against a recessive, Mark snarled, "I can still break you," and lunged at Elliot with fists raised. Elliot didn't try to box him, he didn't have the strength to trade blows. Instead, he pulled a collapsible steel baton from his sleeve, a nasty, illegal piece of metal he carried for emergencies. As Mark swung, Elliot ducked. Mark fell to the floor wailing, blood pouring from his nose. Elliot stood over him, panting. The exertion made his migraine spike to a level that dimmed his vision to a tunnel. He swayed, almost collapsing. "Don't ever come near him again," Elliot gasped, looking down at the sobbing man. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a phone, but he didn't call the police. He dialed his chief legal officer. "Destroy him," Elliot whispered into the phone, staring blankly at Mark. "Bankrupt him, foreclose on his apartment, freeze his assets, sue him for kidnapping, assault, and emotional distress. I want him to live in a cardboard box." Elliot hung up and turned to Leo. "Run," he ordered. Leo didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled up and sprinted out the back door, leaving his fiancée bleeding on the concrete. Elliot turned toward my chair, took 2 steps, and finally fell to his knees. His strength was entirely gone. "Elliot!" I shouted, straining against the ropes. He crawled the last few feet with shaking hands, pulled a small knife from his pocket, and sawed through the zip ties. The moment my hands were free, I reached out and grabbed him, pulling the recessive alpha into my lap, right there on the dirty floor. "I've got you," I whispered, wrapping my arms around his shaking shoulders. I pressed his face into the crook of my neck, right over my scent gland, and released my scent, thick, warm, comforting burnt whiskey and rain. Elliot let out a ragged sob and inhaled greedily, his body going limp against me. "The noise?" he mumbled, clutching my shirt. "It stopped." "I know," I said, kissing the top of his head. "I'm here. Just breathe." Chapter 13, The Merger. 1 month later, my loft in the Arts District smelled of turpentine, linseed oil, and fresh coffee. It was a stark contrast to the pristine white silence of the Tristan estate, but Elliot didn't seem to mind. He was sitting on a mismatched sofa in the corner of my studio, reviewing a file on his tablet. I stood in front of a massive canvas, covered in paint, with streaks of indigo and charcoal on my arms and a smudge of white on my nose. I was painting furiously, reclaiming the exact style Leo had tried to steal for my exhibition next week, titled The Resurrection Collection. I put my brush down, wiped my hands on a rag, and looked over at Elliot. He looked tired. The shadows were back under his eyes after a long week of board meetings and hostile takeovers, and he was rubbing his temple absently. I walked over, took the tablet from his hands, and set it on the floor. "Headache?" I asked softly. "A 4 out of 10. Better than usual, but persistent," Elliot admitted, leaning his head back against the cushions. I sat down next to him. "Come here," I told him. He didn't hesitate. He shifted and laid his head in my lap. It was a routine now, a medical necessity that had blossomed into something much more. I ran my fingers through his dark hair, scratching lightly at his scalp. Elliot sighed, his eyes fluttering shut as the tension in his jaw unspooled. "Did you hear about Mark?" he murmured, his voice heavy with sleep. "I heard he's working at a car wash in Jersey," I said, smiling. "And Leo is trying to sell herbal supplements on social media." "Justice," Elliot whispered. "Vengeance," I corrected. "Expensive vengeance," Elliot replied. He turned his face inward, pressing his nose against my stomach, and inhaled deep and slow. The scent of the artist, paint, sweat, and that deep grounding whiskey washed over him, completely replacing any pill. It was the only place in the world where the static in his head went quiet. "Are you happy?" he asked, his voice muffled by my shirt. I looked around the studio. I looked at the ring on my own finger, not a diamond, but a band of hammered platinum that Elliot had given me a week ago. It wasn't an engagement ring yet. It was a promise ring, a symbol of our partnership. "I'm painting," I said. "I'm free and I have you." I leaned down, kissing his forehead. "I'm happy." Elliot's breathing evened out. The pain was gone. The cold CO was gone. And there was just a man resting safely in the arms of the fire that warmed him. "Good," Elliot whispered, drifting off to sleep. "Then I am too."
Seeing Jeff go from that rainy road back to his own studio was the heart of this project for me. Writing the moments where the ice and fire finally find a bit of peace was my favorite part of putting this together. I really wanted to capture that specific feeling of the world finally going quiet when you find where you belong. If you want to dive into more of the worlds I've built, my shop is the only place to find my older BL and transmigration stories. Thank you so much for supporting what I do and being part of this journey.